Two open mic performers, so that means we move on to our feature readers. And tonight's Alberni Valley Wars on Fire regional spotlight features Healey, author of On Their Own Terms, True Stories of Trailblazing Women of Vancouver Island. On Their Own Terms is a fascinating collection of concise stories about 21 courageous, independent, and diverse women who shaped the history of Vancouver Island. Sounds quite intriguing. Healey is a high school counselor, registered clinical counselor, and a self-proclaimed trailblazing woman herself. She has taught in isolated flying communities, guided whitewater canoe expeditions, and plays the violin, probably not all at the same time. She has an avid interest in wild places and unconventional people, should be fitting in right here. She has appeared on Into the Wild, an outdoor adventure radio show on CHLY, Nanaimo's campus community radio station. So now let us give her a wild Zoom welcome for Healey.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. I am coming to you today from the traditional territory of this Nanaimo First Nation in Nanaimo, so not too far from Port Alberni. And I'm really excited to be here today. So I thought, my presentation, from what I understand, is kind of about 15 minutes. So I thought for the shape of it, I would tell you a little bit about my inspiration for my book, On Their Own Terms, True Stories of Trailblazing Women of Vancouver Island. And then I would do a couple of short readings. And if anybody has questions, they could ask a question. Otherwise, otherwise I'll hand it over to the next reader. So I guess I can show the book to start. Hopefully there's not too much glare. This is the cover. And I guess I should tell a little bit about myself first. So as was mentioned, in the day, I work with high school students, helping them to get their classes sorted out and cope with the trials and tribulations of high school life. Do lots of problem solving all day long. Growing up, I loved reading. I always loved reading, and I didn't go out wanting to be a writer. I went sort of the education route, but always loved writing as well. Did a little bit of writing for my university newspaper. And then a couple of summers ago, I did a hike called the Hesquiat Trail, about 4 days. Myself and 5 women friends did this hike. And at the end of it, we hiked over, it was a really varied geography, beaches, shelf rock, pebbles, like ankle rolling rocks about this big, Billion Boulder Beach. And at the end of it, we got a tour of Cougar Annie's garden. So Cougar Annie was a pioneer homesteader, backcountry gardener, an entrepreneur. She had a post office and a store, and she was a cougar bounty hunter. Her garden still exists, and it's about an hour, maybe a bit over an hour boat ride from Tofino, or you can come into it from Gold River by plane as well. So we flew into our hiking trip, hiked the trail for 4 days, and then got a tour of this garden. And that's what actually inspired my book, being at Cougar Annie's garden. So after it, I sort of thought, are there other, interesting women out there among the ranks of Cougar Annie? And it turns out there were. So On Their Own Terms features women that are pretty well known. The best known is Emily Char and Cougar Annie, and then women that are lesser known but very interesting in their own right. I wanted to talk about the cover super briefly before I do the readings. So this is Hannah Maynard on the cover, and she was born in England, lived in Bowmanville, Ontario briefly, and then moved to Victoria, BC, when Victoria was a booming gold rush town. And Hannah in Ontario had, her husband had owned, or he had been away a lot, and while he was away and she was raising the children, she taught herself photography. And then when they moved to Victoria, her husband had a shoe shop, and she had a photography studio. So she did a lot of really groundbreaking photography, really ahead of her time. And this is a photo, the front photo here is, I believe 1893, and it's experimenting with multiple exposures, which of course today is, you know, you can do it quite easily. Back then it was pretty groundbreaking. So she did a lot of other interesting photography, and this photo is from the BC archives, and lots of people have different interpretations of it to this day. Okay, so to the words, I'm going to start with reading about Hannah Maynard. So I gave you a little introduction on her, and here we go. It is 1898, and you enter a building off Johnson Street in Victoria, BC. You walk through a shoe shop on street level, walk up a staircase to the second floor, and pull back a black velvet curtain. Welcome to Hannah Maynard's photographic gallery. On one wall is a penny farthing bicycle, its large and small wheels leaning against a backdrop of a canoe floating in a glassy water. Another wall holds a false fireplace and an emerald green sofa with a pillow showing the face of a young girl. The smell of sulfur and sandalwood fills your nostrils. A tall vase with a Dieffenbachia plant is held up by a cherub statue. A delicate paper parasol hangs above two framed photos, one of a glamorous woman in a black dress, the other of a cemetery headstone. A round table is set for tea with a soft gray fur rug beneath it. A desk has some papers neatly stacked on it. A large black box with a hole in its front sits on the desk. This is most definitely the workspace of a photographer who created creative, progressive, and unusual photographs. Hannah Maynard was an unusual woman who did unusual things and lived a remarkably unusual life. She loved bicycles and playing with photographic illusion techniques. Many of her photographic subjects were criminals, as she was the first official photographer of the Victoria Police Department. Hannah Maynard was unapologetically weird and wonderful. So again, there's one photo of Hannah Maynard in Beacon Hill Park. And that was a little reading from the first story in the book. So how I decided to order the stories and on their own terms is I ordered them geographically from south to north. So I started in Victoria. So Hannah Maynard's is the first story. And then I move all the way up Vancouver Island and at the very northern tip of Vancouver Island, Cape Scott. So that's how I decided to order it. So we were in Victoria. Now we're going to go up island, and we're actually going to go to Port Alberni. The next little reading I have is a woman who hails from Port Alberni. Maybe some of you have heard of her, maybe not. Maybe there are some of her relatives still there. I did my best to contact relatives, anyone who I knew who was still, who was living and who was willing to read the story, make sure I had things as accurate as possible. So maybe you know somebody who's a relative of Dorothy Blackmore. I did end up reaching her daughter, who now lives in Saanich. So this is a little bit about Dorothy Blackmore. Dorothy Blackmore squeezed her boat through the narrow mouth of the inlet where the loggers were stranded. She expertly navigated through a gale-force wind and fierce waves before reaching the point of land where the two men awaited rescue. They were loggers on a timber cruising and oyster harvesting trip gone wrong. Their boat had crashed into a log, leaving them stranded for 2 days and one night with only oysters to eat. When the police got the call, they contacted Dorothy Blackmore. She was credited for the rescue and later received a letter of thanks signed by Julius Blodell, owner of the prominent Canadian forestry company the two men worked for, Blodell, Stewart, and Welch. Dorothy Clarice Blackmore was born in Port Alberni, BC in 1914. Her father, George Blackmore, owned Blackmore Marine Services, primarily a water taxi service. Dorothy's older brother had no interest in boats, so George taught Dorothy the family business. At 10 years old, she was driving boats solo. After finishing high school, Dorothy started driving boats full-time. She drove fast and she drove well. Speed was essential in the boating business as the first boat there got the job. She qualified for her master ship captain papers at 21 years old, but could not get certified. It was 1935, and many industries still did not consider women to be persons, no matter what the law said. So I'm going to leave that one there, and if you want, you can read on to find out what happened with Dorothy. But there she is, and yeah, Port Alberni local. So we'll move up the island. We'll keep going north here, and I thought we would go all the way up to we'll go to the northern tip of the island now. So we'll go all the way up to Cape Scott. So to get to Cape Scott, you drive up to Port Alberni or to Port Hardy, and then you take a logging road a few hours. And then now there's no roads that go up all the way to the Cape Scott settlement. If you get there, you have to hike it. So I usually go there every winter between Christmas and New Year's. A couple of friends and I hike up there, and it's quite the time to be up there. It's just dark and quiet and really, and often very wet, but just so beautiful. So Ellen Gibbs is the next story I'll read. And Ellen Gibbs was a pioneer, and she started in Nanoose Bay. So she had lived in Nanoose Bay with her husband. They had several of their children there, and then an interesting opportunity came to them, and I'm going to start that part of their story here. So this is Ellen Gibbs, chapter 17. In 1908, adventure came calling to Ellen and Billy. Billy's friend Theodore Fredrickson, and Billy is Ellen's husband. In 1908, adventure came calling to Ellen and Billy. Billy's friend Theodore Fredrickson and some Danish settlers were making a homesteading attempt on the very northern tip of Vancouver Island in a community called Cape Scott. Ellen and Billy headed north. The first settlers in Cape Scott had been Danish fishermen Nels Jensen and Rasmus Hansen in 1898. They hatched a dream of a utopian community after discovering fertile meadowland, a sheltered lagoon, and pristine forests while traveling around the area by ship. By 1899, Cape Scott had a store, sawmill, boat mooring area, telegraph office, community hall, newspaper, post office, and school. The pioneers were excellent farmers and their farms were productive. However, without a road, they had nowhere to sell their produce. Undaunted, they held on to the government promise of a road and continued attracting more settlers to grow their community. Ellen and Billy were among the second group of settlers trying to make a go of it at Cape Scott. They moved there with their 4 daughters. Ellen was born in 1907, Dorothy in 1908, Ada in 1910, and Alice in 1913, around the time that Cape Scott's population was at its peak. The pioneers were determined to persevere through wet weather, storms, broken dikes, and the constant concern over cougars who killed domestic livestock and ate wild game they hunted. Billy fished, worked as a road boss, and worked on the telegraph line to Shardy Bay. Ellen had many roles at Cape Scott. Along with raising her 4 daughters, she was the community veterinarian, builder, hunter, midwife, and even dentist. So I'll leave it at there for that one, and you can read on if you want to see what happened to Ellen and Billy and their daughters, whether they stayed at Cape Scott, whether they left, and just what homesteading was like up there at that time. This is a photo from that story, and it's the field, and those are pieces of driftwood that are making the fence there, and that's at between Experiment Bight and Geis Bay. So pretty beautiful area. It looks different now, but I just love driftwood, so I loved this photo from the BC archives. So I'll finish off with just a little really short paragraph at the end, and then I'll be done. Thank you. Yeah, thanks so much for listening, everyone. This is from the conclusion. Living life on your own terms means different things to different people. Maybe it means seeking adventure and creating experiences that align with your values, whatever those may be. Maybe it means exploring and defining the life you want, or seeking and creating what fulfills you and brings you joy. I hope you liked the cast of female characters and enjoyed reading about their lives, setbacks, and adventures. And I hope that it encourages you to live your own life boldly and on your own terms. So yeah, I'll end it there. Hopefully that's an okay length. I can go longer if you need to, but if
Perfect.
that's an okay length, thank you so much for listening, everyone.
Well, thank you, Healey.
Yes, thank you, Healey. Would you like to do a question and answer session?
Yes. I
Yes,
hope so,
yes.
because
If
I have a
anyone has
question.
questions, for sure, yeah.
We love doing it. So quick, somebody fire out a question.
Hello. Hi. How did
Hi.
you get to know these people, like, because they're not alive anymore? How did you find out their stories and stuff like that?
Yeah, for sure. I used a lot of archives. So the Salt Spring, there are 3 women from Salt Spring Island. So Kimiko Murakami is a Japanese Canadian from Salt Spring. And then Marianne Gives is an Indigenous woman from Salt Spring. And then there was, just looking at, and then Emma Stark was also from Salt Spring, but also spent time in Nanaimo. So yeah, archives were a really big one. Lots of old newspapers, the Times Colonist have all their old papers online, and often archives have a bunch of them too. And then I did my best to connect with family members of the women. So one of my very favorite parts actually of writing the book was getting to meet the 3 children of Elizabeth Kwok's sister, who is from Campbell River, and this is her here. And she was a photographer and a cultural teacher, and quite amazing. And so I met 3 of her children, and
Cool.
was really honored to hear about her from them.
That was a
And
great.
using the the BC archives has a births, deaths, and marriage, and so using lots of their resources from that.
Well, it's a great book. Actually, before I sort of knew you were going to be coming one of our readers, and I saw the little post in the Vancouver Island Victoria paper, and I thought, oh my god, my dad likes to read books, so I bought it for his birthday, and it's a really good book.
Thank you. That's so awesome. I hope he enjoys it.
He did enjoy it, and we actually tonight we have one of the ladies living on one of the properties of that you wrote about, Sharon Barnett.
Oh, amazing. Oh, great. Yes, for sure. And
Yeah,
I'm gonna get in contact with Sharon so I can hear more, about the research she's done.
yeah.
Question, how long did it take for you to do research and work on this book?
So I did
A lot of work.
most of the work in the summer. So like full days and for a couple of summers, I guess. But like a year sort of in total. But most of the time was spent in the summers working on it.
Beautiful, thank you.
Any other
Oh,
questions?
I've got a question. Healey, did you have trouble? Was it hard to pick from all the interesting women that you encountered in your research?
Yes, for sure. There were many, and there were actually so many that a few didn't make it into this one. But then Heritage House asked if they requested if they could put it in, if we could do another book, and there were a few that I had forgotten. So Flourishing and Free will be coming out in the spring.
Okay.
And so that was really exciting, and definitely they didn't quite kind of make it into the first one. There wasn't space, and then I realized from a Nanaimo Historical Society meeting that I had missed somebody really important who had spent time well, not far from Port Alberni, out by Bamfield at Cape Beale there. And so she'll be in Flourishing and Free, and is one of my favorite stories in that one.
Cool. When were you at the Annie Cougar's place?
That was 3 summers ago now. I think it would have been 3 summers ago. So 2017, I
Right.
think would have been.
And was that girl that does, I can't remember her name, I met her, that does stuff to do with Annie Cougar. Was she there at that time or no?
We got a tour from Peter Buckland,
Okay.
who he's mentioned in the book, and he knew Cougar Annie and actually helped take care of her in her later years, and then he ended up buying the property. So he was the one who gave us the tour.
Okay, yeah, I can't think of the girl's name, but she does a lot of stuff to do with Cougar Annie, and she did a production on that. It was really cool. So
Oh, neat. Awesome.
I can't think of her name right now.
Okay, neat.
Well, I think that's it for the questions for
Can I ask a question?
one more question, and then we can move on. One more.
Yes. I'd just like to say, having lived on the Louis Stark property for almost 40 years and doing research, just with some of the information that Healey was able to pick up from archives, how much it varies from the local history of the area. And I just found that interesting, and sort of, that what we have in archives isn't always the truth of what maybe really happened when we're dealing with old information. So I just passed that on.
All righty then. Thank you very much for your comments.